Olá, sou a Mariana Alvim, bem-vindos ao Vale a Pena, o meu podcast onde conhecemos as pessoas enquanto leitores, com o apoio da WUC, a maior livraria online portuguesa. Fiquem por aí, vale a pena.
Today, I have Elisabeth Strout with us, an American author from Portland, Maine. She's widely known for her empathetic novels that are typically set in small towns and feature flawed but likable characters dealing with personal issues. You studied English at Bates College and later earned a Juris Doctor degree and worked for legal service, but for a short period of time. From a young age, Elisabeth kept notebooks where she wrote daily details of her days and also loved reading and spent hours of her youth in the local library. During the summer months of her childhood, she played outdoors, either with her brother or more often alone. And this is where she developed her love of nature. And I love this detail about you because it says, like the seaweed-covered rocks along the coast of Maine and the woods of New Hampshire with its hidden wildflowers. And there's a mention because Olive's Kittredge mother got them from her husband, wildflowers, and she didn't care less.
Right.
in your latest book, and we'll get there. So even when you were a teenager, you continued writing avidly and studying American writers. Poetry was something you read and memorized. And by the age of 16, you were sending out stories to magazines. Your first story was published when you were 26. So you were persistent and hard worker. So good for you and lucky us. Elisabeth is known for her deep empathy, which shines through her in characters and stories, as she has an exceptional ability to observe and describe the nuances of human relationships. So I'm such a fan, and publicly so. And lots of people, I got dozens of texts saying, Mariana, Elisabeth Strout is coming to Portugal. So I am so thrilled not only to know you, but having you on my podcast. So thank you so much and welcome, Elisabeth.
Well, thank you. It's really, really lovely to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy. So in the books you wrote, lots of them are translated into Portuguese. Amy and Isabel, with the same name in Portugal, shortlisted for the Orange Prize and nominated for the PEN Faulkner Award for Fiction. It was adapted as a television movie starring Elizabeth Shue. I think I love Elizabeth Shue since she was Tom Cruise's girlfriend in Cocktail Movie. Other books in Portugal, and I love them all. The dearest, Olive Kittredge, won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, later adapted into an Emmy Award-winning miniseries. Olive Again, in Portuguese, A Segunda Vida of Olive Kittredge. Oprah's Book Club, what an honor. Then, actually, concerning Olive, I once had as you know, we're going to get to know you as a reader, and I'll let you talk very soon.
That's quite all right.
I once had a guest in this podcast, a Portuguese writer, actually, João Tordo, and he chose Lucy Barton as one of his favorites.
Nice.
The 4 books, and we'll get there. And then when he said, my name is Lucy Barton, the first of the 4, I mentioned, of course, Olive Kittredge. And he said, yeah, he also praised it. But then he said, he called Olive a narcissist, a self-centered woman. And I have to confess, maybe I even agreed at the beginning, like superficially she is. But then, I felt for her. I wanted to defend her because she's so, the narrator is so self-explanatory. So it really made me think about it because despite being difficult, I got her.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about it? Is she a narcissist?
I don't know. I don't know much about that word, even though I used it in my new book. But
You do, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's very prickly. I think she's very off-putting in many ways. But I think that as the book develops, and especially in Olive Again, I think she's capable of great feeling and feeling for people. I mean, like in the second story in Olive Kittredge, she's puts herself in the car because she knows that man is thinking about killing himself. And she puts herself in that car and she won't get out.
Even grumpy, with her grumpy.
Yeah, because she knows and she's going to sit right there and she essentially kind of saves his life in a way. So I think, if you can stand her, then you see that she's actually got feeling for really deep feelings for people.
Yeah, I think it's like filter that we keep losing throughout age.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love Olive Kittredge. And then Lucy Barton, of course. I love them all. They were translated, of course, each at a time to Portugal. Yeah. And then I love the first, then the second, then the third. Then, there's a fourth. And then I love them all. So
thank you.
And they were also awarded. And I loved, William, the expression, Oh, William. I read it like that.
Yeah,
Like,
no, it can be said so many different ways. Like, oh, William. Oh, William.
Oh, William.
Oh, William. Oh, well,
I love everyone, and I recommend to our Portuguese readers. They're all translated. So the last one, Tell Me Everything, Conta-me Tudo, just came out in Portugal. Again, an Oprah book club. Wow, congratulations. And then you put Lucy and Olive together.
I know.
Thank you for that.
I know. That was so fun.
You want to tell me about it?
Yeah, well, it was funny because whenever I write a book, I finish it and I never plan on returning to the character, but then somehow the character is still bubbling around in my head. So I wrote, Lucy by this, whatever. I just kept writing about Lucy for a while. And then, but then it occurred to me one day as I was walking around, I thought, wait a minute, Lucy and Olive are now living in the same area. And so is Bob Burgess. Because from Olive again, we realized that Bob has come back to Maine and even the Burgess boys. And so I realized, oh, wait a minute, they're all actually living in the same area. And I thought, wow, let's get Lucy and Olive. What would that look like? And so that was the first scene I wrote of the book, actually, was to get Lucy and Olive together. Because, Olive being Olive, she's not going to like her at first. But then, they make their way and they become friendly.
Of course.
Yeah.
And you realize that in the beginning, and even when after their first encounter, then when Lucy talks to Bob, she says that. At the beginning, she didn't like me, but then at the end, she did. In the first encounter.
Right, exactly.
And you want to tell me a little bit about the story?
The story that Olive tells her the first time that they get together. It's about Olive's mother, and Olive has never told anybody that story, which I think is interesting. I mean, I can get back to that later, but I think that we all have things that we just don't tell anybody for whatever reason. So she's had this story, and she thinks that maybe she first thinks maybe Lucy might want to use it for one of her books, but she really wants to tell somebody the story. So she tells Lucy the story about her mother and how her mother was very much in love with a fellow, and the fellow's mother broke them up because they were different classes. Olive's mother was very working class, and the woman's son was very upper class. And so they were not allowed to be together. And then she thinks about, and Lucy talks about how they lived with a ghost in their marriages, probably each one.
And we can't tell why, but it's the biggest detail, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm with Lucy. I thought it was a very sad story.
Yeah, it is a sad story. It is.
So without spoilers, you want to tell me a little bit about the book? To tell our listeners.
Right. Well, there's the Olive and Lucy get together about every 40 pages or so, and they tell each other a story. So there's that motif that goes on. There is a murder that takes place in it, which I had thought would be a bigger part of the book, and yet it turns out that's just another storyline. But the book is really, I think, about Bob and also Lucy and their friendship. But Bob Burgess is, to me, such a lovely person. And he has no idea that he's that lovely. He just is Bob. He goes around his life and he takes care of so many people, and he just doesn't even know that he's doing it because he's just Bob. So that was interesting for me to watch Bob, taking on, as we say, as I wrote, the sins of all these people.
And I love the details. You always have this in your books. You have, I think I even gave you as an example once with some writer that was here in this podcast. I was like, sometimes when you're looking for someone's voice, I think that if I was to do a blind test, like don't show me the cover, read it and tell me whose it is, I think I would recognize you because you have these very sweet details and way of telling things and grown up ways.
Right.
Like, for example, I love details. So
details are very, very important.
Yeah, and yours are all useful for the story.
They have to be.
Yeah, and for the building of the characters.
Yeah.
So it's like Olive Kittredge, she sees the way Bob looks at Lucy.
Yes.
Of course, they're in love.
Yes.
No, they're not.
Right.
They're just
the
friends.
narrator says. Right?
Yeah. I love the narrator.
Right. The narrator here was a different kind of narrator for me, and that was interesting for me. The narrator is a large narrator, but very inclusive of the reader as the narrator goes along.
He knows the characters, and it seems like he knows us. She's telling us.
Well, whoever.
Yeah, whoever. You.
I know.
Elisabeth Strout. So tell me everything. Conta-me Tudo, the latest one, and I recommend them all. I brought them here. I have a pile of books in front of us, between us. And then I want to get to know you as a reader, but first I still have a question because you said two questions, actually. One is when you were a teenager and you, besides studying American writers, you also memorized poetry. Are you still into poetry?
I love poetry. I just love it. I don't read it as much as I did for years and years and years. I would read poetry, and I would memorize it when I was younger. I can't memorize anymore. My head just doesn't seem to do it. And I don't seem
too
to
many
want
characters
to.
inside.
Yeah,
of
there's
you.
too many things going on.
And do you write poetry?
I did when I was about 8 years old.
Oh, that's so
When I was
sweet.
about 7 or 8, I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a poet. But I wasn't.
You still have
a
that
writer.
work?
No, I don't have it. I don't have anything left.
And the second one is that you said recently that you are not organized in the creative process. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I mean that when I sit down, I have no idea what's going to happen every day. I just don't know what's going to happen on the page. And I just try and, concentrate very, very deeply so that I'm inside that character, the character that I'm working on. And I just see where he or she goes and what happens. And then I will write one scene and then I'll write a different scene. And then eventually the scenes connect. And then at some point, of course, I have to start at the beginning and pull them all together and say, okay, now this is going to be the start of the book. And now this and this and this. And we'll see how it ends. But I never know how it's going to end.
Okay, so you make it up as you go along.
Yeah.
They decide, the characters decide.
Yeah, they do. They actually do, especially in this book. Because as I was getting close, without giving anything away, I just thought, oh no, I have a real dilemma here. What am I going to do? And I thought, well, just be true to the characters. So I was.
Exactly. They tell you the answer for you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So let's get to know the Elisabeth reader. So when are you able to read in your tour life and your amazing rhythm of writing? When are you able to read?
When I'm not writing, I read. I walk and I talk to my friends and stuff like that. But I have a very uncomplicated life, actually, for the most part. And so I read.
That's great. And you have a favorite genre?
I just keep returning to the classics, actually, at this point. Yeah, literature, just basically literature.
Yeah, that's what we're going to.
Right. But I have become very interested in biographies as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I once was told, and I'm over 40, and I was told recently that actually it was a friend's mother, and she loves biographies. And this friend of mine, he didn't read biographies, neither did I. And suddenly, recently, I started enjoying biographies.
Right.
And she said, it's because you're older.
Oh,
But
that's
true?
interesting.
Maybe does it make sense? Or you used because you read it when you were younger.
I read a biography of Hemingway when I was about 17 years old because I had read all his work and I was so into. I mean, I didn't know anything about him, didn't even know he was that famous or anything. But I just read all his work one summer because we had it. My grandfather had bought it from a traveling salesman, so we had all his books, and I read them. And then I was very interested, so I went out and found a biography of him at a younger age.
And you started. That's the one question I have for you because you, of course, chose classics for this conversation, and some of them are. I don't know if it's easy to read when you're young, so I'm going to ask you that. When did you discover them? And before the first book is from William Trevor, but you would like to have dinner with.
I just adore the work of William Trevor. He died rather recently, and I'm just so sad. He was older, but I just loved him. I love his work so much. And his stories, I have two of his collected stories, one downstairs and one upstairs, so that I don't have to walk up and
the
downstairs.
same book, of course.
Yeah, the same book, so I can have one when I go to bed, and I have one downstairs, when I'm on the couch. So, and I keep just rereading them because they're lovely. They're just so soft and gentle. And then he's written numerous novels, which I also enjoy. So he's a wonderful, wonderful writer.
You read them all. We have, I found not all of them, but 2 novels in Portugal that translated from William Trevor.
Interesting. Okay, good.
Yeah, but the rest is in English. But there's this quote I read about him. Actually, it could be about you, Elisabeth. So, the crafted sparseness of description, the luminous sense of place, the profound insight into the depths concealed by social conversations. Each story proceeds at a kind of internal rhythm, and his sense of eloquent tact animates every paragraph. He never crowds his characters or smothers them with adjectives, but allows them to incarnate themselves on the page. There is a wise, forgiving kindness in his curiosity about human weaknesses, but it's an effective strategy too, for it draws the reader into the story so irresistibly. I could say this about you.
Oh, well, that's so sweet. But that is how I feel about him. He's just so quiet and gentle, and his insights into people are so quietly incisive. You just go, oh, right, that's so true. That kid would do that. All of a sudden, even though you're surprised, he's just a master.
A master of empathy.
Storyteller. Yeah.
He moved several times during his childhood. His father was a bank official, and he was educated at various schools, including St. Columba's College in Dublin and Trinity College Dublin, where he received a degree in history. And before becoming a writer, he worked as a sculptor.
Yeah.
Under the pen name William Cox. And he taught art. You knew all this?
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
So he has several novels and short stories. Is there any story in specific you would like to recommend?
There's a story called Mrs. Silly. I don't think it's in his collected story. Oh, it might be in collected stories as opposed to selected stories. But there's a story called Mrs. Silly that I love so much.
And is she silly or that's her name?
Well, that's what she calls herself. She's divorced and she's a little bit, frowsy, and she's nervous, and she's got a son, and the son's father has married a very posh woman, and then they both the parents go off to his boarding school for, some event. And she calls herself Mrs. Silly. She's always said, oh, I'm just Mrs. Silly. but her son loves her. And then, so at the school event, she embarrasses herself because she talks too much. She just ends up talking to the headmaster, and then she ends up falling over, and she's so embarrassed, and she's just terribly, terribly embarrassed. But what's brilliant is that the father and his posh wife do not make fun of her. They're very kind to her. I mean, which is so interesting and so smart of him. Anyway, she feels terrible, and she's off in her room, and then the son has his private lunch with her in the room, and then at the very end he goes back to his dormitory, and the kids are making fun of her, and so he makes fun of her as well. Aww. But when he goes to sleep, he thinks, but she's my favorite person in the world. Aww. And it's just heartbreaking. I loved it. And she said, oh, I'm just Mrs. Silly. I'm so silly. I'm Mrs. Silly.
Oh, I feel for her.
I know, me too. Oh, she kills me.
And William Trevor, he won the Whitebread Prize 3 times and was nominated for the Booker Prize 5 times.
I know.
It's like Meryl Streep with the Oscars.
I know. He really was just wonderful.
William Trevor, the collected stories. We have in Portugal, Felicia's Journey. The novel translated.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Have you read it?
Yes.
Do you recommend it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Felicia's Journey then. Now, about 150 pages and a classic. When did you discover The Magic Mountain? Montanha Mágica by Thomas Mann.
The Magic Mountain, I discovered later. I was in my 20s. I was in my late 20s. And I knew that there were certain classics I hadn't read, and I was just determined to read the books that I thought I should be reading. And so I began The Magic Mountain. It's not an easy book. It really takes a lot of concentration. It's a big fat book, and I had a commute between Brooklyn and Manhattan. So I was on the subway an hour going, and then later an hour going back. So I read that book on the subway for about a month or 2, and that's how I read The Magic Mountain. And it was very, very, I'm so glad I read that book. It was very, very interesting. And then there was a foreword, an afterword written by Thomas Mann. And one of the first things he said is that I think the reader should now go back and read this book again. And I thought, oh, honey, you're lucky I read it once. But it was a great book. It's not a book I go back to where I do with many classics, but it was a wonderful book, and it takes place in a tuberculosis sanitarium. And I just remember at some point I started coughing as I was reading it. I realized, because I was so into it. It's a wonderful book.
It's like the main character. He went to visit his cousin in the sanitary, and he stayed there for 7 years.
Yes, exactly.
And so for those who haven't read this book, why should they read it?
Well, if you want, you should read it if you're interested in that time period. It was a World War I situation, and if that's a time period that interests you, and if you're interested in Thomas Mann, you probably already have read it, but it's a different kind of read, and you have to watch out for it. And there are different observations that are very astute, but you have to look for them. You have to be, he doesn't just serve them up to you. You have to.
He makes you work.
Yeah, he does. He makes you work.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's hard to explain because there's no action, there's no plot.
Right.
It's my inner thoughts and
different people in the sanitarium. There's this younger woman, there's this older man, there's all these different people. And the ending of it is absolutely brilliant. It was just astonishing. So
it was worth it to read it.
It was
until
so
the
worth
end.
it. Right. It was so worth it. Yeah. But when I saw that he suggested we read it again, I thought, I'm so sorry.
Then of course, this. In real life, Thomas Mann's wife, she went to a sanatorium with tuberculosis.
Right.
That's what inspired him to write this book.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he was inspired also. Some of his friends, even a former lover before his wife, the son of a teacher, inspired one of the characters, which was Prislav Hippie. I don't know if you remember the characters.
I don't remember that.
And even in Dr. Faustus, other book from him. Have you read Dr. Faustus? Did you like it?
I did. I did like it. Yeah.
There's also characters inspired by his friends.
Yes.
Does our Lucy and our Olive and our Bob, you have any friend that inspired you, these characters?
It's... No, they're not inspired by people that I know. They're not, and I don't know where my characters come from, and I know that's disappointing to readers, and I know it's the truth. I don't really know where they come from, but they will arrive either sort of quietly like Lucy, or in a real, like Olive just showed up.
Yeah.
Boom.
Louder.
Because she's Olive, and I realized, this is so interesting. They sort of, and then Pete Barton, Lucy's brother, very quietly seemed to be sitting next to me for a long time. And I finally said, okay, I'll have a story about you.
Yeah, it was in the second book, I believe.
In, Anything is Possible.
Anything is Possible,
right.
Exactly, the second one.
Right.
I think that's, I don't know if it's a disappointment for the readers. I think it's a great compliment for you because they do look like real people.
Yeah, and I can see them, and I know who they are.
Yeah, they're alive in you.
Yeah, they are. They're very much alive in me.
And also in me.
Yeah, well, they're good. Phew.
Of course.
So good.
Another book you chose. Another huge classic, 850 pages, Anna Karenina by Tolstoy.
Yeah. I've read that more than once. I've read that a number of times because I just see it a little differently each time, but it's just such I just think it's a wonderful, beautiful book, with poor Anna.
She was married. She fell in love with another guy. They had
Vronsky.
They have a child. You want to tell me a little bit?
Well, I mean, she falls in love with Vronsky, who turns out every time I read it, I have a different opinion of him.
Why?
Well, I just don't care for him at this point.
Already dislike him.
Well, yeah, so I don't need to read it again anymore. Actually, I don't. Well, maybe I will, but I'm just saying, every time I've read it, I thought, he's really not so great, is he? But her husband's worse. He's really so stiff, and then he won't allow her to see the child, and it's just such a sad story. And so, the suffering of a woman who is so tired of her husband and falls in love, and there you are. Happens all the time.
Exactly. I had on this podcast, I had the American author Bret Easton Ellis.
Yeah.
Know?
Wow. Yeah.
And he also chose Anna Karenina.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And he said this paragraph, he said, "It's the greatest of all Russian novels, as satisfying as a tragic soap opera, as well as an epic philosophical trip into the Russian psyche and soul. Along with Madame Bovary, Anna Karenina is the greatest female character ever created."
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy, also in Portuguese. And of course, I think this is the most favorite classic of all, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf.
Right.
When did you discover it?
I discovered Mrs. Dalloway when I was about 18 years old. And I don't know why I loved that book so much. And I reread that book probably every 2 or 3 years throughout my entire life. And then finally one day I read it, and it was the last time I read it. And I realized later, I thought, that's probably because I'm about the age of Mrs. Dalloway at that point. I had been reading it that long.
Okay.
And I finally read it and I thought, okay, I am now done with you, Clarissa Dalloway. But thank you very much. You've been wonderful, but goodbye.
Okay.
But I don't know. Every time I read it, I would just see something different in it, or I just thought it was a thing of real beauty. And the way Septimus Smith, is a perfect juxtaposition for Clarissa Dalloway, who seemingly has everything. But again, I mean, her marriage isn't like Anna Karenina's marriage at all. But it's a little dull for her in certain ways, but she's a lovely woman and she gives these lovely dinner parties and
she goes to buy flowers.
Yeah.
And then
exactly.
a whole world happens in
whole
one day
world,
in her head.
Precisely. And then you've got poor Septimus Smith, who is also a World War I veteran, who has terrible post-traumatic stress. And that's a wonderful little sub-story within the book. So I thought it was sort of the perfect novel.
Same as your novels. You have a lot of sub-stories within the story.
Yeah. Sort of counteracting.
Exactly.
Right.
So Mrs. Dalloway starts at the end of the Great War.
Yeah.
And the Magic Mountain, it happens before the Great War. So there's a period you studied and you followed.
Yeah.
Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Now I have one difficult question or not. So we have the collected stories of William Trevor, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, and Mrs. Dalloway. What if I would ask you to choose one?
I would choose William Trevor.
Okay. and it's a lot of stories within the book.
I would choose every single thing he wrote, including his laundry list if it was published. I would read anything he wrote. And he's written so many novels. And they're just beautiful novels. And there was actually a movie made of one of his books that I happened to see recently, and it was quite lovely. I mean, often they're not. But The House of Umbria, My House in Umbria,
okay,
was made into a movie with Maggie Smith, and it was very, very well done.
I'll write it down.
Anyway, William Trevor, he comes out on top always.
He's regarded as one of the greatest contemporary writers of short stories in the English language, and he's known for his wit, humor.
Yeah, very quiet, subtle.
Okay, smart.
Yeah.
So now it comes a surprise for you. In the end, I always recommend a book. And I looked at my library, what I have in English as of today. But I recommend a lot of them for you, and probably you know some, and especially the authors. For example, The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell.
Yeah. Right.
Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
Did you like it?
I liked it very much.
Okay, so
yes.
Great. It would be a good recommendation. Yeah. Another one, I haven't read this one yet, but I have it because I heard so many beautiful things. And I think for what I know about it, it might be your kind of book. From Abraham Verghese, The Covenant of Water.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
It seems like I'm in a contest and I got
it's absolutely lovely, lovely work.
We also have all of what I'm saying in Portuguese. So the Marriage Portrait, O Retrato de Casamento, The Covenant of Water, O Pacto de Água. Another one also in Portuguese with the same name, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver.
I have not read that one. I know of it, but I haven't read it for whatever reasons.
Okay. Shrines of Gaiety, Kate Atkinson.
Oh, she's great. Kate Atkinson, yes.
The Secret History by Donna Tartt.
Yes, I've read that
you
twice.
Read it?
Yeah.
Twice?
Yeah.
Wow. I love The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt.
Yeah.
You read it twice
yes.
now?
No, I didn't read that one twice, but I read that once.
And I also, there's this poet, because if you're still into poetry, I was thinking about Mary Oliver, Devotions.
Oh, she's wonderful. Mary Oliver.
I got your genre.
Oh my goodness, she's just about my favorite poet.
She is?
Yeah, she's just absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful poet.
Wow. Because I have all the books I'm saying, I brought them.
Oh.
And I was reading her poetry. I'm a late discoverer of poetry.
Yeah.
But then there were two poems that I thought, if Elisabeth doesn't know these, I have to show her.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to read?
Sure.
It's these two. I think they are like so you.
Okay. So on each side?
Yeah, there are two. Yeah.
Okay. So this is called How I Go to the Woods. Ordinarily, I go to the woods alone, not with a single friend. for they are all smilers and talkers and therefore unsuitable. I don't really want to be witnessed talking to the catbirds or hugging the old black oak tree. I have my way of praying, as you no doubt have yours. Besides, when I am alone, I can become invisible. I can sit on the top of a dune as motionless as an uprise of weeds, until the foxes run by unconcerned. I can hear the almost unhearable sound of the roses singing. If you have ever gone to the woods with me, I must love you very much. Beautiful. Love it. I just think she's amazing. Isn't that wonderful?
It is. And I thought it was so you.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm so glad to be reading this again. I haven't read this for years. It's so wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad.
On the beach. On the beach at dawn, 4 small stones clearly hugging each other. How many kinds of love might there be in the world, and how many formations might they make? And who am I ever to imagine I could know such a marvelous business? When the sun broke, it poured willingly its light over the stones that did not move, not at all, just as to its always generous term it shed its light on me, my own body that loves equally to hug another body. Amazing. But look at that line. When the sun broke, it poured willingly its light over the stones. Willingly. Oh, she's so good.
Light over the stones. It also reminded me of your writing. That's why I thought of
thank you
when I read it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, and I have another book to recommend and to give you. And if you have it, or you can choose the other two. I brought them all, actually.
Wonderful.
So at the end, I give my gift to you. Do you know Amor Towles?
Yes, I do. I know him personally. I love his work.
Oh, you love it? No,
yes.
You know him in person?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Lucky you.
Yes.
I love The Gentleman in Moscow.
Yes.
And I brought The Lincoln Highway. Have you read The Lincoln Highway?
I have. I'm sorry.
Okay, give it back.
But I have, yes.
So
he's absolutely lovely. Wonderful.
Yeah. So I can give you, well, I took notes of what you've read or not. I was all...
I'm so sorry, but thank you.
No, but I'm glad that I got it right.
Yeah.
Your kind of book, your type of book. So we have Them and Copperheads by Barbara Kingsolver.
Okay, I have not read that one. Okay. So there we go with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Elisabeth.
you so much.
I think you were a little shy and I'm nervous, so I think I spoke too much. I'm sorry about that.
No. You were lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is wonderful. Thank you very, very much for a wonderful conversation. Great. Lovely. I can't believe you nailed those poems. Oh, that was so fun. Beautiful. Yeah.
I'm
thank
so happy.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. How interesting. How very lovely of you.